Um, the owner of the dealership, when he saw the video, lost his mind. It went viral. And then people started posting this on
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation for SAAFoST. We are very lucky that Owen organized Yabus for us today. So thank you very much, Owen.
We're very happy to agree.
I know. Thank you very much, Yabus, for actually being here and agreeing to this. Before we even start, I would just like to tell you, Yannis has given his presentation to me. So we'll put it up on the website afterwards, obviously. It's not on yet. I'd like to introduce him though and give you a bit of overview because I know a lot of people know him already, but I'm sure there are a lot of young people who don't know Yannis. He holds degrees both in chemical engineering from the University of Pretoria and law from UNISA, and he's a registered attorney, a patent attorney, and a professional engineer, as well as a partner at Hahn & Hahn. He's a custodian member of SAAFoST and sits on the Council of FSI of the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, and then also the Food Law Advisory Group of the Department of Health. Yannis has assisted many leading listed companies as well as the CGCSA and SAAFoST with their various foodstuffs, cosmetics and disinfectants Act and regulations, Medicines and Related Substances Act and regulations, and Consumer Protection Act submissions to various government departments and parliaments, as well as implementation in their businesses. In particular, Yannis has recently extensively been involved in the issue of prohibited trademarks and the prohibition on advertising to children under R49, as well as the GMO labeling debates. This in-depth and ongoing involvement in the process has given Yannis special insight into food law and the Consumer Protection Act. He has recently won the SAAFoST President's Award at our Okay, Yannis is a member of many institutes, so I won't go into it. But thank you very much for being here, and yeah, thanks.
No, thank you very much. No, thanks for all being here. Of course, the most important thing that wasn't on that CV, and which I got to state right up front, is I'm actually involved in the Listeria case on Tiger's side, on Enterprise's side. So obviously, I can't discuss any content of the case, although obviously I can speak about the principles which underlie a case like this. I have no issue with doing that. Anyway, but on a completely different, unrelated note, I've just come back from 2 days in Budapest in Hungary, and there I purchased what I thought was a Sprite Zero, and it was mint flavored. Now, I don't know who here has ever tried to drink a mint flavored lemonade, because it actually tastes like fizzy Listerine. So I'm not sure if there's anyone here who thinks it's a really good idea to have a mint flavored sparkling soft drink. Is there anybody here who thinks it's a good idea? But anyway, I just thought that was one of the stranger things I've had in my life, where some marketing people are sitting somewhere and saying, let's do something no one has done before. Not thinking, why has no one done it before? All right, so to our topic today, let's talk about the legal consequences of a Listeria outbreak. And it's so timeless because just in the last few days, there's been a lot of press coverage again of a, is there or isn't there a Listeria outbreak? And NICD went on LinkedIn and they said, no, there isn't an outbreak because only 147 people died this year, and statistically that doesn't count as an outbreak. And, as an engineer, I did a bit of statistics as well, and I'm a bit concerned about that type of analysis because the year is long. Was this 147 in 1 week, 1 month, 6 months? Where in the year was this 147? If one looks at the 2017 analysis of the Listeria cases. They also didn't occur equally throughout the year. They also spiked at a certain time and went away. So we may very well be seeing the beginnings of another outbreak or identification of another outbreak, even though the NICD says there isn't. But I just thought it's an important point to understand. But from a legal point of view of a lawyer that's representing either complainants who claim they had Listeria or people who died from Listeria, or a lawyer who's defending companies in these types of circumstances, it doesn't matter if one person died or 1,000 people died. From the point of view of the person who died, it's a 100% event. Never forget that. But don't get, got to see through statistics. Now, 147 people, that's a lot of people. You know, so let's just bear that in mind. All right, so let's talk about the legal liabilities in an outbreak, but maybe we shouldn't be limited to an outbreak. Let's call it to a food safety event where people get very ill or die. And first of all, we have the issues of criminal liability. Now, in this entire situation that we've had so far with the Listeria outbreak since 2017 until now, in fact, there haven't been criminal consequences. And the reason why there haven't been criminal consequences is because of failures of government, if I say. The government wasn't prepared for anything like this, so when it happened, they weren't in a position to prosecute anyone or to take the type of steps required to be able to prosecute anyone. For example, collection of evidence, taking it to the laboratories, getting the correct analysis done in the period required by the Act, etc. But I'm sure in the future that won't be the case, because now everybody is aware of what needs to be done in order to prosecute someone on a food safety event. So, in terms of criminal liability, we have the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act, or the FCD Act, and there we have the usual suspects, R638 being the most obvious one, the hygiene and food safety regulations, the new ones that came into effect in June this year. We've got things like R146, but they mainly relate to labeling. It wouldn't necessarily be an issue here. We've got the Agricultural Product Standards Act, which as of very recently has processed meat regulations, has the VPNs, the veterinary procedural notices, which are currently being finalized related to import of foodstuffs and of meat and the microbiological standards that apply thereto. We have the Common Law and Criminal Procedures Act, which deals with the obvious things of murder, homicide, and GBH's grievous bodily harm. You know, don't just think that you can only kill somebody with a gun. You can kill somebody with a knife. You know, I don't really remember at the time of the outbreak there were these pictures going around of a death certificate and it said cause of death below. So it can in fact be that you can be convicted of a criminal offence, not in terms of one of the other laws, but actually just as a normal homicide or murder or whatever. And then of course we've got the Constitution of South Africa, which has the right to life, and you could be found guilty of contravening that right under the correct circumstances. Think of the Esidimini life case and the people that died and the inquiry and the findings that were made. There are civil liabilities. So criminal liabilities, we should just understand, it's you get prosecuted, you go to jail. Okay, it's a criminal matter, criminal liability. Civil liability is somebody sues you for money, that take action against you. And there the most important one, or the first one that pops up, maybe not the most important one, is contractual warranties by suppliers to retailers. So if you're a supplier to a retailer, you've signed generally a long document. And somewhere in the document, you warrant that the product is compliant in all manners and ways with all the laws of South Africa, that the product is safe. When it's not, the retailer has recourse against your company. Because you've now sold them a product which in fact is in breach of the contract. Let's forget about the breach of all the other laws as well. So that company can then, the retailer would be able to sue you for all their losses. Now, let's forget for a moment about the people who died or were ill. All the retailers had to remove all products from sale for an extensive period of time. Fridges were empty. You walked into supermarkets and the shelves were empty. So those were lost sales. Potentially, the retailers could sue suppliers and say, you caused us a loss of income in terms of your contractual warranty in your supply. Then we've got the Consumer Protection Act. Now, the Consumer Protection Act is in fact the one that's at the forefront at the moment, because that's the one in terms of which the current class action is taking place. And the Consumer Protection Act, in our context today, deals with two main issues. The one is product quality and safety, and the second one is product liability. In other words, claiming for harm to consumers or for damage to property. Now, I don't think there's much damage to property unless the bologna exploded in the microwave or something. But certainly, there can be harm to consumers. And there was, people got sick and other people died. And then we have the common law, where you could have delictual damages, as they call it, for harm caused through negligence. Now, that generally would only apply to people who aren't covered by the Consumer Protection Act, so it would generally be intercompany, business-to-business type liability. For where a consumer is involved, the Consumer Protection Act comes first because it gives far broader protection. Then what other liabilities are there we need to consider? As I said, we have the Constitution of South Africa, and in the life meaning that the damages of about 1 million rand per victim were ordered by the previous Chief Justice, Mussolini. So, although it wasn't a case with a claim through a court, yet there was an award of damages to the families of the victims. And it's not impossible that in a case such as this, we would have the same result. Then we have director's liability. So if you're a director of a company, you have certain obligations under the Companies Act in terms of good governance to ensure that your company doesn't suffer losses, number one, but also that you act responsibly and so on. And I'll put up a slide about director's liability a bit later. Then we have the National Regulator for Compulsory Standards. Probably not that relevant to an outbreak situation. It's more to do with product compositions, although there is a reference to SANS 885, and SANS 885 does in fact have microbiological composition in there. So you could be in a contravention of the NRCS VC 9110 and could be prosecuted for that. And then in terms of the Health Act, there's a provision that if there is an outbreak and you identify it in a patient, you have to notify the Department of Health. So it became a notifiable disease. And a lot of food poisoning causes are in fact notifiable diseases. So as you can see, this is not a simple, there's just one type of liability, oh, this happened, therefore you're liable. There's many ways that this can play out. The one that nothing has happened on, as far as I can see, is the criminal aspects. Nobody was prosecuted. Not to say somebody should have been successfully prosecuted, but there was no actual attempt to prosecute anyone. And that's actually, in a way, quite disheartening, because you'd have thought at least they would have been looking at the case and trying to prosecute. I don't cover it in my presentation, but in fact it's too late, they can't prosecute. Unless they could show intent, that somebody sat at the factory and said, we're now going to kill people, let's put Listeria in. Now, in terms of the Foodstuffs Act, they had a 30-day period from when the samples were taken to institute prosecution. And that came and went. We are now 2 years down the road, 18 months down the road, there has been no prosecution. Okay, so what does the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act say, now that you've seen the overall big picture? It says, any person shall be guilty of an offence. So you're guilty of an offence. You're a criminal if he, interestingly, they don't presume any woman would do this, sells or manufactures or imports for sale any foodstuff or cosmetic, number one, which is contaminated, impure, decayed, or is in terms of any regulation deemed to be harmful or injurious to human health. So immediately you can see that an outbreak where people get sick and die would be in contravention of that first point, or which contains or has been treated with or contaminated with impure or decayed substance or substances, etc., etc. So it's a criminal offence, there's no doubt. Read the Act, there's a section, section 2, makes it a criminal offence to sell a foodstuff that is contaminated, impure or decayed, or in terms of any regulation deemed to be harmful or injurious to human health. So there you go. Could have been a criminal offence and someone could have been prosecuted. The Foodstuffs Act, however, I don't want to say this, but I suppose it's true, doesn't see these types of crimes as particularly serious. And if you look at the types of maximum fines and sentences one can get, for a first conviction, it's a fine or imprisonment for 6 months. It doesn't say, but if there's a lot of victims or it's a very serious case, no, it works on first conviction, second conviction, third conviction. So that's the first aspect. The fines themselves are quite small. they certainly, I think if I remember correctly, it's 50,000 for a first offence as a maximum fine. Okay, so that's the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act, if you could be criminally convicted. Let's view it from the side of, say, a retailer that's now selling this product. So I'm a retailer. I'm being supplied by a reputable company, or it doesn't matter if they're not reputable. I'm being supplied by a company, and obviously I believe that the product is going to be safe, otherwise I wouldn't sell it, because my company has its own reputation to protect. So what I do is I get the supplier to issue me with a written warranty from a South African address. And this is very important. You can't import a product from China and you get a warranty in Tianjin. That's not going to protect you anyway. There has to be somebody here that can be prosecuted. So if it's not you as the retailer, it's going to be the guy who imports it here, the importer here, or the supplier here. If you're importing for yourself, then this doesn't help you in any way, because you're the importer and you're the retailer. But this section says that you can avoid prosecution on the following basis. On a charge of selling or importing any foodstuff in contravention of this act, for example, the previous slide, if you can prove that he or his employer acquired or imported the article in question under a written warranty, complying with the provisions of Section 7. Section 7 just says, as I was saying, it's got to be a local person that issues the warranty. Warranty has to say certain things and so on. So as a supplier to a retailer, retailers normally have terms and conditions in their supply agreements, and they generally include this. You may not even be aware of it, because some buyer in your organization simply signs it without even thinking what is the consequence of what they sign. That he at no relevant time had reason to suspect that the article was a prohibited article. What we mean here is, it doesn't help you to have a warranty if you know there's something wrong with the product. And you can't then keep selling it. Now, why am I saying this? So let's think of an outbreak situation. The product is constantly coming in and going out, and it's in DCs and it's all over the place. Initially, you say, I have a warranty, I don't know there's something wrong with the product. But at some point, you become aware that there's something wrong with the product. You have reason to suspect there's something wrong with the product. If you at that point continue selling, you're no longer protected against prosecution. And then finally, you have to sell it in the condition in which you acquired or imported it. And at no relevant time could you have reason to suspect that it was in any other condition. So you got it, it was chilled, it was safe, it was properly stored. At some point you become aware that this hasn't happened. Maybe the cold chain was broken. Again, your get out of jail free card falls away. So this warranty is of some help, but it's not a clear all the decks type of thing. You can never prosecute. You still have liability if you don't understand what this section is saying. Then there's the question of the liability of the employer or the principal. You know, you can't say, well, you know, we're in a big company, and actually the guy 3 floors down, he's responsible for this. It's not my fault, it's his fault. What this says is that there's a liability of an employer or a principal for any act or omission of an employee, manager, or agent, which constitutes an offence under the Act, will be the act or omission of his employer. So the employer is liable together with the person that did the wrong thing. And the only way you get out of it is the following. You have to be able, as the employer, to prove, number one, you did not permit or connive to permit such an act. You took all reasonable measures to prevent the act. The act or omission, whether legal or illegal, did not fall within the course of employment of the person who did it. So it's not sufficient just to say, well, you know, we have a policy in our company that you should never do anything illegal. That's not going to protect you. You have to be taking positive steps to prevent these things happening. Not simply some general thing that sits in a file somewhere in HR and that everybody gets to read or told to read the day they join. That's not going to help. And then, it's not sufficient that the employer forbade the act or omission. That in itself shall not be regarded as sufficient proof. You have to show that all reasonable measures were taken to prevent such an act or omission. For example, ongoing training, ongoing interaction with the people responsible for these functions, so they understand why this is so important, that they mustn't do these things. Now, this often conflicts with what's actually happening, where people, let's say at store level, are put under pressure to cut losses. stop wastage. So they do things that you wouldn't want to do, but somehow head office wants to distance itself from that because, well, you know, our policies is don't do anything illegal, but the guys are being measured against reduction of losses and wastage. And how do they reduce wastage? They change dates, they do all sorts of strange things. Okay. And then the provisions of subsection 1 shall not be deemed to relieve the employee, manager, or agent from liability. What this is saying is the employee also can't say, but my boss made me do it. The so-called Nuremberg defense, that was found not to work after World War II. Okay. Something is wrong, you can't just do it because your boss told you to do it. So this plays both ways. Okay. Then we've got the liability of the importer, manufacturer, and packer. And then it says that the person, according to the label of the foodstuff, sold in a sealed package, which does not comply with this act, or which was imported, manufactured, or who imported, manufactured, or packed the article in question, is presumed to in fact be the responsible person, and they're the one who will be convicted. So your branding and your address and so on appearing on the label makes you primarily responsible. Don't take it lightly. Okay, and this will apply unless you can prove the following. Number one, he didn't actually import it. Maybe it's counterfeit. Because I've had this. I've had somebody come to me in the case of a counterfeit product. Their name is on the product, but it's not actually their product. So that's possible. That the non-compliance of such article with the provisions of the Act is due to deterioration or some other change which occurred after such article left his possession. When I'm talking about the Consumer Protection Act, you see there's a similar provision. You can show when you handed the product over, you can show there were proper temperature controls in place, you've got detention samples, you've got micro results. All of this is showing there was nothing wrong with the product at the time it got loaded into the truck as you drove away from it. You can't just assume it is, you're going to have to prove it. The onus will be on you to prove that there was nothing wrong. And then the non-compliance of such articles, the provisions of the Act, is due to the deterioration. Okay. And then it says that the provisions of that section shall not be deemed to relieve any person from liability incurred in terms of the Act in respect of the sale of any article. So I'm selling a product branded under your brand, I am also liable as the person who sold it. You're liable because you imported it or made it, I'm liable because I sold it, unless I can show one of these things. Now the reason I'm explaining this is because this hasn't come up, no one gets prosecuted under these things, I don't understand it, you know. South Africa is a country of good laws that aren't enforced. So this is Act 52 of 1974, so those of you that got an A for maths, you can work out how many years we've had this law. And there are very, very few prosecutions, very few. There's one or two that I know of. One many years ago, a bee in a Sparletta bottle. And Coca-Cola got prosecuted for a bee in a Sparletta bottle. Things like that. But yet other very serious things, no prosecution takes place. Okay. So, moving on from the generic sections, I just wanted to highlight the fact of the microbiological regulations, microbiological standards, which to date have still not been amended, although there were drafts out and so on. Just to let you know that at the moment there's still no reference to Listeria in the micro regulations. But of course there's a catch-all phrase which says that you cannot sell any product which is contaminated. So there is a catch-all phrase, but there's nothing specific about Listeria. Okay. Let's talk about the one which I think is really important. So when this whole outbreak started, which was alleged to have happened at the Polony factory, that was 2017. So in those days, R962 were the relevant hygiene regulations. We are now in 2019 and our hygiene regulations are now R638. You get a 1/3 discount. So, and these regulations were changed actually as a result of this outbreak. Having said that, the draft had been in circulation for 3 years. So there was a draft in circulation for 3 years, R362, and after this outbreak, suddenly came through very quickly. It was finalized and it went through. Okay, whatever the reason, this is what we now have. We now have much better hygiene and food safety regulations. In fact, it's the first time we have food safety regulations. The previous ones were simply hygiene regulations, which is not the same thing. So, what do these regulations say? And I'm really only going to be quite brief here. So first of all, you're not allowed to handle any food on a premises which do not have a valid certificate of acceptability. And we'll talk about what is a certificate of acceptability. liability. Then the other very important point here is that a person in charge of food premises, if they're replaced by another person, so you go into I'll say like a McDonald's and you see there's a sign on the wall and it says certificate of acceptability, and then there's a person's name and an ID number. That is the person allegedly in charge of those premises. And I use the word allegedly because I've been to a couple of these fast food places, as you can see, and I ask them, and in many cases they don't know who that person is. No one in the facility knows who that person is, which means it's been gone so long that no one remains that knows who that was. Okay. But in terms of R68 now, those people should actually close their doors because this section says, if the person in charge of food premises is replaced by another person, such person shall inform the local authority in writing of such replacement within 30 days. And then they need to get issued a new certificate in the name of the new person in charge. But here's the kicker. If you don't do that, your certificate expires permanently, automatically. The EHP doesn't come and say, oh, I see you don't have this person anymore, we're going to give you a week to fix it. It's gone, it doesn't exist anymore. The law has already cancelled it. You need to apply from new for a new CRO. Because the name on that wall is not for anybody on these premises. Well, they don't have to be on the premises, but he's not in fact the person in charge. You know, some companies have taken a view, I think with huge danger to the people involved, where one name appears at 20 stores and the guy sits 1,000 kilometers away in some head office. And of course, when an outbreak happens and people die, they will come and look for the certificate and they'll find the guy's name and ID number. Okay, you're the person in charge. Why were you not here? What did you do to prevent this outbreak? And why do I say this? Because one of the things that the person in charge has to do, and I'll get to a slide in a minute, is to ensure that there is no risk of contamination, etc. on the premises. And I don't understand how you can be doing this from 1,000 kilometers away from some head office. You're an accountant and you don't actually even know where the store is. Okay. So let's talk about inspections under R68. So a person in charge may not handle food or allow food to be handled contrary to the provision of these regulations. Okay, that's clear. So what is the role of the inspector? The inspector being the EHP. The EHP can do an inspection of the food premises, and if they are then of the opinion that the premises or facility or any activity constitutes a health hazard, and that the continued use of the food premises or facilities must be prohibited, then they can issue a prohibition notice. Now this is really important because this is in fact what happened in Pretoria West when they thought they found the original cause of the listeria and closed the chicken facility on the basis that in their opinion this was in fact the cause of the listeria. And they did nothing wrong. They used their discretion, having viewed all the evidence available at that point and determined we are of the opinion this is the cause of the listeria. There's no criticism about it. I think they did the right thing. Okay, so that is a very important thing, that the inspector doesn't have to wait for proof absolute for 6 weeks for some whole genome sequencing results to come back from Paris. He has to act now because there are lives at stake. And he does this based on the information available to him at the time. But the other thing that the inspector now has to do, which they didn't have to do under R962, because the previous slide also was under R962, but today there's further requirements. The inspector must look at the condition of the food premises, the manner in which the food premises are used, the food premises, whether the food premises complies with the regulations, the manner in which a particular activity takes place, and the circumstances that exist with regard to the food premises or the facility or any other activity. Now the reason why this is important, because the EHP can't say, I've seen 3 people who say they ate a product from your facility, got sick, I'm ordering your closure, without considering these things. They still have to consider this. So it's quite important that if that food outlet or whatever challenges the closure, you would, as an EHP, would have to show that you in fact considered these aspects. All right. And then if they're still of the opinion the facility needs to be closed because of food safety and public health, the local authority may summarily prohibit the use of the food premises, and then the prohibition notice is handed to the person in charge, or if they're not available, his representative. Because you know what you find, it's like when you have a bus accident, the driver runs away. So What we don't want is that when the EHP goes in the front door, the manager, the guy who's named the certificate, disappears out the back door, and then you can't close it because you can't give him the certificate. So this makes provision that you can give it to basically anyone on the premises that happens to be an adult. Okay. Once you've got the prohibition, it takes effect from the moment you get the prohibition. They say you need to close now. Of course, that doesn't mean you stop all your machines mid of an explosion in the boiler room or something. You've got to obviously then immediately take steps to start running everything down, clean everything, and that's it. Last shift, you're not running anymore. It's a criminal offense to act in any way contrary to the prohibition order. So if you're ordered to stop, or if a certain production line is ordered to stop, but you continue to use it, it's a criminal offense. And then the person in charge, upon whom the prohibition order was served, may, after fixing whatever the problem was, in writing, write to the EHP and say, please come back, inspect what we're doing, I want you to lift the prohibition so we can carry on. Okay. And then the inspector must, within 72, there's a problem in the regulations, I say working hours, but it's actually, I'm pretty sure it's 72, it must be 3 days, can't be working. Of receiving a written request for the removal of the prohibition or to carry out an investigation. So if I write and I say, we fixed the problem, please come and re-inspect, they've got 3 days to come and re-inspect. And once they've re-inspected, the local authority may, upon completion of the investigation by the inspector, inform the person in writing that either they're lifting the prohibition or there still remain things to do. We're keeping the prohibition enforced, we still got to do more. So this is what's happened under R638 in terms of criminal liability. But just remember, you cannot simply continue because you disagree with the EHP. You can't do that. You can't say, well, I disagree with you. It's like being arrested by a police officer, you disagree, so you run away. Can't do that. It's a criminal offense. Yeah.
Yes. So the inspector comes in as a sort of a preliminary investigation and feels you have to stop, and then he issues that prohibition notice. Yes. But now what you do is you're cleaning the facility, so you're removing all proof that you've done anything wrong.
Oh no, sure. Look, by then they would have obviously already swabbed. You know, the decision, that's what I'm saying, the decision can't just be based on some extraneous information. The decision is based on the checklist. And in carrying out the checklist, they would have taken samples, swabs, but they can't necessarily wait for the results. So they may get a Listeria yes, no positive, which is quick. But they're not going to wait to see from the whole genome sequencing, which takes a month, which one was it. But in the meantime, maybe people die, maybe they don't.
Is there an obligation on the, let's call it the manufacturer to hold certain of the things there?
Only if the inspector, so there's another regulation, R328, which is powers of inspectors, in which they can either take samples or request that you don't destroy certain things. But that's at their insistence. It's not automatic by you. Although most manufacturers would have retention samples and things like that anyway. Okay. So, this person in charge, what is their liability? And this is really important. If you're a person in charge, I would seriously pay attention to this, because this is the one that's going to get you jailed. So the person in charge must ensure that, first of all, they are suitably qualified. Now, please note, it doesn't say the employer of the person in charge must make sure they are suitably qualified. What it says is, the person in charge must ensure that they are suitably qualified. Don't take a job you're not qualified for, or otherwise adequately trained in the principles and practices of food safety, not just hygiene, and that the training is accredited or conducted by an inspector. Now, we have a problem at the moment in South Africa, is that most of the accredited training is not of a high enough standard. But it doesn't absolve the person in charge from making sure that they are suitably qualified or adequately trained. If I want to be a pilot for South African Airways, let me give you an analogy. And I find a flying school that's willing to rubber stamp my application for a pilot's license. They let me play some PlayStation simulator. They say, you know what, you seem like you know what you're doing. You know what, here's a pilot's license. Just tell me which flights you fly, so I don't get on one of those, but here's the license. And then you go and you fly the aeroplane. It's the same here. You've got to be sure that you are suitably qualified. The fact that some guy accredited you on an online 4-hour course does not make you suitably qualified. These are different And if there is another case where people die, and the person in charge gets prosecuted, the question that will be asked will be, show me what makes you suitably qualified in food safety to be running this facility. If I was a public prosecutor, that's a question I would be asking. Okay. Then the other people in charge must be suitably qualified and adequately trained, but in principle that's the same as in the old regulation, so the business itself can have their own training and make sure that people are trained for their specific duty. They work on a production line, they do that specific. Then it says, C, routine assessments must be conducted to determine the impact of the training and the need for further training. So you don't hire a guy when he's 18 years old, and when he's 62, he's had no more training. He's been working there for 44 years old. Okay. There's got to be regular assessments and ongoing training to make sure that the people still are up to speed and up to date with food safety, which is also a moving target, by the way. And then finally, training programs and records must be kept and routinely updated, because that's what the EHP will come to look at when they come and do inspections at your facility to make sure that you're complying with this. Because this is where outbreaks stop. This slide is where outbreaks stop. If the people in charge are suitably qualified in food safety, they are able to stop the outbreak before it happens. Really important. And then in this regulation, one of the things which is the duty of the person in charge is that the condition after emission that may contaminate food does not arise or is not performed or permitted on the food premises. A lot has been said about cleaning food premises and where Listeria lurks and it sits in cracks in tiles and under a foot of a machine and all of that. That's a responsibility of the person in charge. That person should have adequate training to be able to understand this. And it's not simply a matter of delegating. You can delegate a function, but you can't delegate the responsibility. You will still be liable. Okay. And then the other responsibilities that the foodstuff manufacturer, etc., must comply in all respects of the provisions of the Act. In other words, any foodstuff that's sold must be safe, etc. And then you need to have a traceability system in place, recall procedure in place, and if there's a reason for a recall, you must make sure that you inform the local inspector and the National Director of Food Control. And those are all the responsibilities and obligations of the person in charge. Failure of any one of those leads to criminal liability of the person in charge. And bearing in mind who is the person in charge, it's a guy whose name is on that certificate on the wall. Of course, if that certificate on the wall is no longer valid, then the person who's actually permitting the premises to be run is actually committing a criminal offense. So, very important. Okay, let's talk about the Consumer Protection Act, because now we're going to get to, in terms of the current Listeria outbreak, or the previous one, the current one, we've got to be careful which is the current one. The 2017-18 Listeria outbreak is, there's a class action lawsuit at the moment. I'm sure you've all heard about it. The Tiger is being sued on behalf of the families of all the people who got sick and died and so on. And this stems from the Consumer Protection Act. The Consumer Protection Act firstly says that consumers have a right to receive goods that are, and I won't read the whole thing for you, but of good quality, good working order, and free of defects. That's a quality promise in the law. If it is found that you systematically flout this, in other words, you're selling inferior quality products on the basis that, oh, well, who's going to know, or whatever the case might be, you could be prosecuted under the Consumer Protection Act, and then your company, and then there's a fine of R1 million to 10% of turnover. But that is not what the class action lawsuit is about. Class action lawsuit is about this slide and the ones that follow. So, the producer or importer, distributor or retailer of any goods is liable for any harm caused wholly or partly as a consequence of it. There's some important words here which I want to highlight. So, it's not sufficient to say that we weren't the only cause of the illness or the death. It's wholly or partly caused by supplying any unsafe goods, a product failure, defect, or hazard in any goods, and then, as I would say, my personal favorite, C, inadequate instructions or warnings provided to the consumer pertaining to any hazard arising from or associated with the use of any goods. irrespective whether the harm resulted from any negligence on the part of the producer, importer, distributor, or retailer, as the case may be. Now, why am I saying this? Because I don't know how many of you have gone and bought a cup of coffee in a what's it, bean at the BP petrol station or McDonald's. You'll find that all somewhere on the cups now say, warning, coffee hot, or handle with care, hot coffee, or something like that. And the reason is exactly this. You need to warn people of a risk. You can't say, but people should know. Why do you buy coffee? Because it's hot. You need to warn them that it's hot. And this springs from court cases in America, where people who burnt themselves on hot coffee sued the company that sold the hot coffee for millions of dollars. Because they weren't warned they were going to burn themselves on this hot coffee. Now, in our case, we've got to be careful, and I'll tell you what the issue is. I hear regularly, our products are safe because people need to cook it before they eat it. So it doesn't matter that there's Listeria on the product, because cooking kills Listeria 10 out of 10. Okay. And the logic is true. If you're in a lab and you took a piece of chicken with a tong and it had Listeria on it and you drop it into 177 degrees Celsius boiling oil, I can guarantee you there will be no Listeria on it. But in reality, that is not what happens. And more importantly, the public are not necessarily told this. There are products which don't say don't eat raw. So I've done talks like this, and some of you have been in some of my talks, and you'll remember what I say. I ask people, who here eats raw boerewors or raw bacon? And in every meeting, there'll be several people who put up their hands and say, yes, when I'm at a braai, I'll take a piece of boerewors and I'll eat it raw. And you may be shocked to learn that the people who make the boerewors are of the view that it doesn't matter if there's some Listeria in the boerewors because it's going to be cooked. But the reality, no, it doesn't say on the packaging, do not eat raw. So, in terms of the Consumer Protection Act, it would not be a defense for the person who sells the bacon or the boerewors to say, but everybody cooks this, so we don't mind that it's got some Listeria in it. Because you didn't tell the people you have to cook it before you eat it. So, very, very important. And then, of course, the last slide is that, in fact, it goes all the way down to a caterer, to a canteen, to a restaurant that is selling a product. So, you know, there are places in the world where you can't order a rare steak or a sunny side up egg with a yolk all runny and so on. And it's because of this. That guy doesn't know where the egg came from. That egg may have salmonella in it. You now ask for the egg to be done extra runny, but when you get the runnies, you come back to this guy and you say to him, you made me sick. Meanwhile, he's not a lab, he has no real way of knowing what's wrong with this egg. So, I'm just saying that if you go to certain places, I know I was in Utah not that long ago, and in all these eateries and things, at the bottom of the menu, there was a warning which said, we do not recommend eating any meat which is undercooked or eggs, this, but then it does say, if you specifically order it, we will serve it, but it's at your own risk. And that would meet C. If they did that, they can do it. They can sell you the bad egg and the steak that's off and whatever. Because then they've warned you. And you have made a conscious choice. I will take the risk. Okay, so how does liability get worked out? Well, if in a particular case more than one person is liable, why do we say that? If you look at the top of this section, it says who is liable. The producer or importer, distributor or retailer of any goods is liable. So in a supply chain, there can be more than one link in the chain that is liable because they didn't do what they're supposed to do. So what this says is, the consumer is in no position at all to sift this out. Okay. General consumer that may or may not have ever done science or microbiology has no way at all of determining who is the cause of his misfortune. So what this does is it helps to sift that process, which is the following. In a particular case, where more than one person is liable, their liability is joint and several. So, except for this bit that follows, you're all in the pot together. Everybody's liable together. Then it says. However, anyone in that chain can exclude themselves from liability if they can show the following. So, liability doesn't arise if the alleged unsafe product characteristic, failure, defect, or hazard did not exist in the goods at the time it was supplied. Remember what I said in that section of the Foodstuffs Act? Is exactly the same thing. You must be able to show there was nothing wrong with the product at the time you supplied it. And therefore, clearly you need proper testing, record keeping, retention samples, micro, positive release maybe. You've got to do things to ensure that you can show that in fact there was nothing wrong with the product at the moment when you loaded it into the truck. Let's not even talk about the truck, because obviously there are trucks that are your trucks, there are trucks which are third-party trucks, and there are trucks which are the trucks of the purchaser. And we don't know what's happening with those trucks. So don't even get me going about Uber Eats and listed delivery and all of those things where I just stop ordering from those things because it's shocking. I saw the condition of those boxes. So, the other way that you can avoid liability is if you are a retailer, it is unreasonable to expect the distributor or retailer, so you're the guy at the end of the supply chain, you have 100,000 SKUs in your store. You would need a laboratory bigger than the NRCS to test every single product for full food safety from every batch that comes in. It's impossible. So obviously you have to do some things for food safety, such as third-party audits, asking for COAs, asking certificate of analysis, that's what COAs in this instance, and things like that. But you can only be excused from liability if you have discovered the unsafe product characteristic, failure, defect, or hazard, having regard to that person's role in marketing the goods to consumers. So your role is you just sell, but you still have to, you have some obligation in making sure the product is safe, but you can't be expected to go to the same extent as the manufacturer or the importer. But listen, you would need to be making sure that you are getting the evidence you need to make sure it's safe. But when does this fail? This fails when you sit at home and you turn on the news and you see the Minister of Health on television and he says, we have a Listeria outbreak and we believe that it's certain processed meat products, and they start announcing it. But yet, you do not pull the products from the shelf. Because now you can no longer rely on the fact that it's unreasonable for you to have discovered the unsafe product characteristic. You saw it on TV, and you must believe everything you see on TV. So, but the point is that all of these defenses only work up to a point. At the point that you are deemed to know, you know. You can't then say, well, nobody told me, so I didn't know. You know, I did a litigation case, which we won at the London Supreme Court, where we had a very interesting story where we would serve documents on the other side's lawyers, and then we would email and fax them. Do you know there's a fax machine? Some people don't know what a fax is. So we faxed and emailed documents to the other side. And the defense of the other lawyer was he never agreed to receive a fax or an email, so when that came in, he never read them. And he lost. The Supreme Court did not find that particularly amusing or responsible. And it's the same here. Once you know there's something wrong, they don't have to officially tell you. You would need to go and do some investigation to determine if the product is safe. Okay. And then what would you be liable for? So now we get into our class action lawsuit. So you would be liable for the death of or injury to any natural person. So not any AI or robot. An illness of any natural person. And then any loss of or physical damage to any property, let's not go there. D is critical. Any economic loss, now any economic loss is very far-reaching, that results from the harm above. So somebody died, but they were the breadwinner in the family. In fact, they were a physician or a radiologist, and the family was used to a very high standard of living. And now that person gets taken away because of the product that you sold them. That's the economic loss that we're talking about here. So the same polony sold to different people has a different value as a claim. Because the claim will be what that particular person suffered, not what the polony was worth when it was sold. Very, very important to understand. Okay. So in terms of class action lawsuits, people are claiming loss of support for family, long-term medical care. You know, there's just very sad stories about this outbreak. I mean, the plaintiffs for the victims are very good at bringing it to the press and so on. And they go to Wendy Nola, she publishes the story of the baby that had listeria, that had water on the brain, so it needed to be supported for the rest of its life. You look at the math, what it costs to support someone that needs support from the entire lifetime, from the age of 3 months until, let's say, the actuarial average of 77 or something. We're talking very big numbers here. We're not talking here about pocket change. So the class action lawsuit is in fact dealing with big numbers. I quickly want to mention the issue of recall, because of course the first thing that happened when the minister came on TV about the outbreak, he said, and we're going to do a recall. But of course the Minister of Health has no power to order a recall. The recall actually has to be ordered by the National Consumer Commission under the Consumer Protection Act. So the very next day, the Consumer Protection Act spoke to Tiger, actually amicably. There was no, we better come to our office. In fact, Tiger contacted them, went to see them, and negotiated a recall strategy, a very proactive one. I'm not saying that they got any leeway, but let's get the product on the market as soon as possible. Let's collect it in a place where we can account for all of it. We know how much we got back, we know how much was sold, you can see that it's gone. So all of this must be done with the approval of the National Consumer Commission. You can't just go on your own mission and decide, well, how are we going to start doing a recall? And I remember years ago seeing a recall on a swimming pool floater. And the problem they had is in the production of the floater, the two halves that get sealed together, the seals will let you go, and the floaters are falling apart. And those isocyanuric acid tablets were falling to the bottom of the pool. Whole pack of them, 5, 6 at a time. So children will dive in thinking, oh, this is how I can dive in and fish out of the pool, fishing out tablets of slowly dissolving isocyanuric acid. So what did the recall notice say? Recall notice said, bring in 1 blue floater and get 2 free white ones. What does it sound like? It sounds like some sort of promotion. It doesn't sound like a recall. So you can't be doing that. You can't say, bring back your polony and get a free packet of Viennas. You've got to say why you did that. You've got to give the reasons, etc. Okay. So the recall notice, once it goes out, cannot state, first of all, that it's a voluntary recall. And it makes perfect sense. Even if it is a voluntary recall, you decided yourself to do it. The public won't understand that. If the public see a notice that says voluntary recall, they say, oh good, I don't feel like doing it. It's voluntary. Product description, we get a proper description, we get a picture of the product, you get a statement of the hazard. So you've got to say, why must you now return this? And I must say, Tiger was very good. I'm sure you remember how they did it. They were clear. They said, don't eat this, bring it back. Put it in a Ziploc bag, zip it. Clean your fridge with Jik or whatever, chlorine or whatever brand they sell. Clean your fridge with that to make sure you kill the listeria, etc. There must be, and then obviously contact details into contact. So that's a recall notice. And that's very important because although the recall notice won't exempt you from liability, definitely when the product is withdrawn, there'll be less liability. I mean, that just follows. Okay, so the class action lawsuits under the Consumer Protection Act, and it comes under this section which says that any one of the following people may approach a court under the Consumer Protection Act, and one of them is a person acting as a member of, in the interest of a group or class of affected persons. Now, what does that mean? In normal litigation in South Africa, historically, it was always John sues Peter, then Mary has a problem with Peter, Mary sues Peter. So each individual person ended up having to sue the same guy. And most people can't afford to do that. They could maybe try to get together, they would list 40 or 50 people all suing the same guy. It's still not the same. What happens here is they say, well, there's 200 odd people who died, there's 1,000 people reportedly made ill, so probably it's 3 or 4 times that. We approach a court and we ask the court, please appoint me, the attorney, to represent all of these people, known or unknown. Remember, we don't know everybody at this stage. Some people may only turn up later. It turns out they become aware that they in fact suffered from listeriosis. They knew they were sick, but they didn't know it was listeria. So the High Court appointed Richard Spoor attorneys to represent the plaintiffs, in other words, the victims of this outbreak. There's a venture capital funder who's helping to pay for this litigation, which you can imagine is very expensive. There's whole genome sequencing, there's laboratory testing, there are legal teams, someone has to pay them. The victims are not paying the lawyer. What happens in a class action lawsuit is somebody will fund the litigation, an external party, sometimes the lawyer, but if he wins the case, he gets a cut. But of course, if you didn't do the case at all, nobody would get anything. So it's not a bad thing. But just to explain how it works, the people themselves are not expected to contribute anything. What happened in this case, it was very interesting quite recently, is that subpoenas were issued to laboratories which tested unrelated companies' products to disclose positive Listeria results and also to various retailers. But this is quite interesting. This is also a new turn of litigation. You know, we started to go the American litigation way, and the only thing we don't have a jury. But this also caused a lot of chaos, because obviously what's happened is that many of the laboratories are opposing this, and they're saying, we can't give you information of our clients' laboratory results because they're not involved in your case. And by the way, we have a confidentiality agreement with them that we won't disclose any information that we test for them. So that's one interesting point. And then the damages claimed on the legal costs incurred are huge. Many millions may be awarded for every deceased victim, several million per victim requiring long-term care, hundreds of thousands per victim who got ill and recovered. Now, multiply that by a couple of thousand people who got ill, maybe 1,000 people who died. We're looking at a several billion rand number here. This is not a car accident. This is big money. So, you read in the press, huge surprise, this case is taking so long. Why is this case taking so long? So, if you're suing people for 2 or 3 billion rand, what do you expect them to do? You say, gee, you know what, they can have your account number, I'll just send you a voucher. Just WhatsApp you a voucher. Of course, they're going to defend the case. If for no other reason, they may not even defend that there was an outbreak, they may defend the amounts. These two things are not the same thing. But anyway, the guy from Richard's attorneys were interviewed on 702. They were now talking to him about why is this case taking so long. So I thought, okay, you know, I couldn't say some of these things, because obviously I'm involved in the case, but I can quote what he said on the radio, because at the end of the day, he said it, not me. So, the summons have been issued and Tiger has pleaded, but now they have to disclose their own internal documentation, which we will rely on very heavily to prove the case against them. Now, my colleague Jaco does a lot of litigation. I'm sure when he reads this, he smiles. These guys will say, we don't actually have any evidence. We're hoping you'll give us the evidence, and then we can sue. Second, the second challenge is that Tiger has issued subpoenas against all the food safety testing laboratories in the country and demanded they disclose who it was that had samples tested during the time of the outbreak and what the results of those tests were. That information is strictly confidential. Well, yes, that's true. I mean, I agree with you, but then he goes on to say, as you can imagine, the laboratories and their clients are not very happy and have indicated that they are willing to fight this all the way to the Constitutional Court. Now, if that prevents Tiger from getting ready for trial, we could have very long delays. So you can expect this case to run many years. Because just this bottom part can take a long time. Let me tell you why this is a big problem. I'm going to say this as neutrally as I can. If laboratories are unable to test companies' samples confidentially, companies will stop sending samples for testing. It's going to affect public health across the board. It's in fact a huge risk to everyone. You cannot have a situation where unconnected parties are demanded to disclose confidential information because for now it seems convenient. Because it will simply result in the situation where companies are going to sit around the table and say, we've seen what happens, we can't send our samples to anybody here. The bigger ones will say, well, what we'll do is we'll send our samples overseas where they can't subpoena them because they're in a different jurisdiction. Or we'll do our own in-house results and we're just not going to disclose them to anyone, we'll shred them by a bigger shredder, whatever the case might be. So I think this bottom thing is potentially a big problem. But that's just a neutral sort of comment on the topic of public health and using labs and so on. All right, so that's where we are with the class action lawsuit. It hasn't really progressed that far. They haven't got further than the people filing the claim, Tiger filing a denial, and this is where we are. So it's still a long way off. But as you'll remember from my bright beginning slides, from a criminal point of view, there have been no prosecutions. The next time this happens, there will be criminal prosecution. If there isn't, people should be fired. Because how can you have a situation where people get sick and die and no one gets prosecuted? Somebody must be responsible. It's not just something. It's not a lightning bolt or a meteor or something. I mean, there were people involved. Somebody didn't do their job somewhere, whatever that job was, etc. Vicarious liability, this is just to explain once again, as I did in one of the earlier slides, that an employer is responsible for the actions of their employee. I'm not going to belabor this point, but it applies equally to the Consumer Protection Act. Quick one on the Health Act notice, notifiable medical conditions. There's a misunderstanding that somehow if you find listeria on your pizza, you need to report it to the Department of Health, and that is not true. What a health notice under the notifiable medical condition notice under the Health Act, as the name says, it's a medical condition. A pizza does not have a medical condition. A person has a medical condition. So once a person has eaten the pizza and they get sick, they have a medical condition, it becomes notifiable. So just to explain that one. Just a quick definition of culpable homicide, so people understand that a food poisoning case can turn into a culpable homicide case. Because the other definition, it's an unlawful, negligent killing of a human being. So depending on how you run your business, you may in fact have acted unlawfully and negligently, and it resulted in somebody being killed. What does negligent mean? Failing to take proper care over something reasonably foreseeable. And if this is done by a natural person or an entity, both can be killed. So it's in fact possible to prosecute someone for culpable homicide over a food poisoning case without reverting back to the Foodstuffs Act or any of these other laws. And then finally, director's liability. Just if you're a director of a company, it's quite important to note, Section 77 of the Companies Act says that a director can be held liable for any damage caused as a result of their failure to perform the functions, obligations towards the company to act in the best interest of the company. Director is held liable to the company for the loss that may be incurred as a result of the damage and may have to pay losses. So a director that makes rash decisions causes a company to lose 3 billion rand could then be held liable by the company, not by the victims, by the company, shareholders of the company, for their actions in allowing this to happen. And a director may be liable to a fine or imprisonment in terms of Section 216 of the Act. This could be for anything under the control of the director, negligently or intentionally not done. For example, a technical director not dealing with unhygienic equipment design or replacement of sensors to detect foreign objects. I cannot tell you how many times I've sat in meetings where we identify a problem in a facility and the people say, you know what, yes, we have that on the budget for 2022. Okay. They need to read this slide. Very important. That's it. Thank you. Hello, these sandwiches need to down.
Okay, so there's time for questions.
Yes.
I just want to clarify something. The laboratories, the comment that you made around laboratories holding back results. They actually don't own the results, the clients do. So would it not be better for clients to approach clients and ask for those results?
No, look, I can't comment on that obviously because you came late, you didn't hear when I introduced myself. I said I act for Tiger in the litigation. So clearly I can't comment on what Tiger should or shouldn't do. Okay. But what I said definitely is that whether that is the case or not, it's a serious problem if companies can't keep results confidential unless they are actually the company that's charged.
I understand that, but I'm just trying to understand the approach. It will be a lot more easier.
But it will depend on the contract between the company and the lab. Right? It will depend on the contract.
The labs never own any of those results. Those results belong to the client.
Look, I don't want to comment too much. I have seen contracts to the contrary. I don't know which lab you're from. I have seen contracts which in fact say the complete opposite. They say that they own the results because they write those contracts from the perspective that there might be some intellectual property that flows out of it and they want to grab the intellectual property.
Okay, I think the issue that I'm raising is specifically from the alternate perspective.
Okay. Hang on, look, I don't know what your particular contract is. I'm just saying that I have seen contracts which are not worth it.
None of the contracts that we have, any of our clients, we don't own any of the contracts.
No, that's good. From what I understand from the court papers, you in fact are one of the guys that are opposing the subpoena. You're entitled to do that.
Yeah, but it says,
yeah. No. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, brother. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing it. You've heard my view on getting this type of information. I mean, it helps a case, but it can effectively the long term damage everybody. Yes, young man.
What is the liability of a government renders its population more susceptible to things like listeria? Because what you're talking about being another outbreak may just be the norm. Because we have, what, 10, 15 million people with abuse resistance. So they're dying much more easily than they should. Is there any
No,
liability on the government?
I think the problem is this with law. You've got to always show a causal link. So it's very difficult. Statistics aren't proof. You know, the causal link has to be shown back to the what caused it. You can't, what's the word I'm looking for? You can't analyze backwards and say because of this, therefore it was caused by that. But reality is there. I mean, I saw again yesterday there's just an listeria outbreak in Germany, the Netherlands, and France. Funny enough, also on sausages. So these things happen everywhere. I mean, it's not that it just doesn't happen. I mean, I think that we also got to realize. And but to the extent that, for example, the government should have been doing proper inspections at food facilities and didn't, and there was an obligation, there may be an aspect of contributory sort of like negligence, some sharing of the liability, etc. I agree with you. But overall, holistically, I think it can be very difficult to attribute specific blame to them on the basis of what you just said. Yes?
In the event that I am a company now that is being litigated against the second outbreak, and I have done a full pre-safety audit of FSSC accredited, and that audit came in, and there was evidence during the audit that there's a possibility that it was a food safety issue, and they overlooked it because of regulations. And then they pass you, say, let me pass that audit. Where does that sit in this whole situation?
So that's very interesting because obviously they're not in a direct chain of supply. So the consumer probably wouldn't have a claim against the third-party auditor. But between the company that was audited, or maybe even people further in the food chain, the retailer that sent the third-party auditor, they may have a direct claim against an auditor, just like it would be a financial auditor. I don't think there's any particular difference. The problem is that you've got to have an understanding of what the auditors are doing, because they work to a protocol. Now, they present the protocol before they get employed. Now, if they audit against the protocol and it's purely a paper exercise, they can step over leaking hoses to get to the room to sit and look at the files, but their protocol is to look at the files, and that's all they're expected to look at. There's probably no liability because they're not supposed to be going along and checking to see there's a nut that's loose somewhere. In fact, they're supposed to be looking at paper. So part of the problem is that maybe the protocols that are being used are not the correct ones for the facilities. And I see Rolf sitting at the back. He can tell us all sorts of interesting stories about it. He does good presentations on how you do an audit. But anyway, so but the point, but that's the actual point. There can be liability if you can show they were negligent in what they were supposed to do and what they did. You can't say they're negligent because they didn't do what they were never expected to do.
Yes, but let's say I'm not a person in charge, and I'm relying on the results of that audit for me to know whether,
But remember, no, your problem is that the auditor is auditing the papers you created. So he can't go behind that or beyond that. You've now presented the auditor who comes in, you say, these are my books. Have a look at all the testing we've done, all the results we got, all the whatever we had to do. Now, if you falsified those results, like the auditor, but if those results if those papers in fact should reveal to someone who's experienced there's a problem and they didn't identify it, there's liability. But you must also be careful because at the end of the day, you were the person as a person in charge who allowed that lapse to occur. They were only supposed to pick it up after the event. Remember, they do the audit 6 months later, 1 year later. Those products were produced 6 months ago and were sent out already under the watch of the person in charge. An auditor is not a quality controller on the production line. Mustn't confuse the two. Sorry, yes.
Just a comment on the say the auditor also samples. So
No, not all of them, right? It depends on the type of audit, it depends on the protocol. That's why I've now seen what different auditing companies do, etc. Some go a long way, some simply look at paper, only look at paper.
So if whatever the individual auditing, those results will not show to you, you won't have evidence that things will happen.
Now,
Like if maybe certain documents were given or whatever, if you didn't identify that there was a problem.
yes.
Yes.
But the day, as you say, the day that I'm there, it's a snapshot. On the day, everything is clean, it's sparkling clean. Now, obviously, there's a systemic problem. There's a dead leg in a pipe that's badly designed, and Rolf comes along and he identifies it. That's one thing. But a general type of audit that comes in, they audit on the day, and what they see is what they see. And unless it's an unannounced audit, because obviously people know when the auditors are going to come. There's all sorts of things that happen that I look at and I say, and people prepare for an audit. Okay, so what is an audit telling you? But obviously, if you're looking at the paper trail, you can see here's all the Listeria results. Oh, suddenly there's a spike. What happened? Oh, okay, they closed the production line, they did a recall or whatever. Okay, they carry on again. So the paper is in fact the important part of the audit.
People that are taking part in those reports, they have to prove that they actually implemented
Well, in any normal court case, you'd have to prove cause and effect. So, because it's in the Consumer Protection Act, you don't have to prove negligence. You still got to prove this product caused my illness. You still don't have to prove that. Now, there might be different ways of proving it, because obviously, if you read, there's no secret what the NICD has published and spoken about at conferences and so on. What the NICD is saying is, but we know for sure, because the Listeria we found in the victims is the same as the Listeria we found in the factory. So they say, well, therefore, we don't have to show that the people ate it, because how would they have got that Listeria into their body? We can try and jump all those steps and say, well, we don't have to actually show they bought the Listeria, there's their receipt, etc., etc. That we'll have to still see, because a Listeria, the whole genome sequencing is not a fingerprint. So it's going to be interesting how this goes down. And of course, the other possibility we must never forget is that there may be other sources of the same Listeria, or similar enough that you can't distinguish it from the one that caused the illnesses and the deaths. And of course, this is what the subpoenas are about, because you could, it's quite simple. You check anyone who's found Listeria and try and find, has anybody found the same or similar Listeria in that same time frame? And if the answer is yes, I'm afraid the case will sink. Because now it's, the NICD stopped investigating when they saw the first time. It's okay, now we know who it is. They stopped looking. Well, that's the impression they give anyway, that they stopped looking. Maybe they didn't stop looking. I don't know. The impression they gave is that they know who it is now. And if it turns out that there are other reservoirs of the same Listeria, it's going to be a major blow for the claimants, for the plaintiffs. Yes, Martin.
Yeah, listen, going back to a more fundamental question, can you visualize a situation where, in terms of the formal regulation, the laws that you quoted and the legal principles behind them, a scenario could arise where either individuals or a class action could be brought against a food manufacturer on the grounds that then the nutritional composition of their product and encourage them to consume large quantities of products could be perceived as a cause of illness or death, because that is a time bomb which would make what we're talking about now pale into zero.
Sure. Look, I think this was tried in America.
Yeah.
So in America, there was a family who took McDonald's to court because they were grossly overweight. And they blamed it on the fact that they ate McDonald's every day. So therefore, it must be McDonald's fault. And the court said, no, you need to be responsible. Yes, eating McDonald's every day will make you grossly overweight. So don't eat McDonald's every day. And so even in America, which is really the land where also all these kinds of arguments fly, even it got shot down even there. I thought you were going to ask me, what if they lie the labels and so on? It's a whole different story. No, I think as long as they disclose all the true information, and it's available to you, and you make the choice to eat 2,000 calories 3 times a day, you can't blame the person who sells it. At the end of the day, it's not like medicine. There's no prescription required or maximum.
Thank God for that.
Anybody else? No? Going. Gone.
Okay. Well, we'll be going to say thank you. Seeing that you got to organize here.
This isn't a simple. Thanks very much, Jonas, for clarifying us. And maybe we better share this.
Wash my hands.
The fear of warning to everybody here. But I think it's also a timely message for food science professionals, which you'll know, and many others, that there are lots of people in factories who should not be there. That's where the food science graduates really need to be, because it's so complicated and there's so much to learn and be aware of that the ordinary day-to-day white colloid who seem to be, well, back when I was in the industry, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying.
And I should add, and more EHPs.
Indeed. But, and this is another thing that SAAFoST has been looking at for some time, to say we need lots and lots of EHPs. We need specialist EHPs. We need food inspectors, people who have the knowledge that food scientists have. Because I think they also must concentrate on lots of other things. So I think they need to polish up their act as well. Very, very much so. And I think this case is going to bring up a lot of very interesting things. As you said, the government's going to be more aware next time of what it needs to do. And I hope by then that the EHPs are much more organized than they are now, and that we have more food science in our practice. Janusz, thank you very, very much indeed. Here's something for you from the local This is a regular contributor, so I hope that we can, if this is going to last another 10 years, we might have to have you every year.
Well, if this one that they recorded now is starting again, I'm doing a new presentation. Thank you very much.